The Prepare Initiative has two main components. The first component of the Prepare Initiative is to fund the next 2 years of ministry. As we focus on the future, we want to maintain momentum in the present. We're calling this Strengthening the Foundation.
Bright City has such a strong foundation as a church in its leadership, its teaching, its community, its outreach. And so even as we think about preparing for what's ahead, it's important that we continue building and strengthening the foundation that we already have.
The passage in Matthew when it talks about how, why are you worried about tomorrow? And tomorrow has enough worry of its own. And so that has to look like us continually being in the present and pouring into the things that we already have.
God has been present. We feel the people of Bright City are present in our lives, and we've been surrounded by God's love and their love throughout our time.
Our desire is to steward and fortify what we have already built by investing in the ministries and people that make us who we are. For this first component of the initiative, we are looking to raise $1.5 million.
I would describe Bright City as intentional at every step. They're thinking thoroughly about things. They're praying through things. They've done the study. Nothing is done haphazard at Bright City. It's really intentional, and that's why we're there. Yeah.
And I think if we were to get tunnel vision on an outcome or where we want to go as a church, it's so easy to lose sight of the people that God has placed right in front of you. And so I think being able to stay present to what God has called us to do in this moment, while also being willing to pray through a vision and look ahead to what's to come.
Because new people are still going to be coming, life is still going to be happening, and we still want to hear the word on Sunday mornings. And so even as we look ahead, we still want to nurture and invest in that foundation that we've built.
City, it is an exciting time, and next Sunday is a big Sunday, as Sharon shared in the life of our church. It's the Sunday where we're going to collectively come together to make our commitments to the Prepare Initiative. But I did want to start by sharing some exciting news with you guys that has already happened. One of the things that we have said throughout this series and said throughout the last few months is that it's so important in something like this for our leaders to go first, for our small group leaders, our team leads, for Sharon and I, for us to lead in sacrifice and to take the first steps on this. And so one of the things that we did this past Tuesday night was we had a special advanced commitment service for our leaders to come together and to make their commitments, because we believe that leaders go first. And so I wanted to share some exciting outcomes from that time together on Tuesday night. During that time, we had 31 of our households or families go ahead and make their commitments. And one of the really cool things in the midst of that is that we had 3 commitments that were made that represented families who had never given to Bright City before, who are taking that step of faith and contributing financially to the Prepare Initiative. And I share that because I know that there are others of us who are in that place and are nervous about the idea of taking that step. And I want you to know that there are already those who are paving the way for you. One of the things that is absolutely blowing my mind about Tuesday night, however, is that when we look at the commitments that have been made, on average, the increase in giving for those commitments is 98%. It's almost double the commitment that they have been making in the past. And so it's just a huge step for us. 13 of those actually did double their giving to Bright City or more. And so people taking this huge step of trust and faith in what we are doing as a church. Now, there's 2 reasons that I share that with you this morning. The first is I want you to know how excited and committed the leaders of our church are about this Prepare Initiative, how much we believe in what God has in store for us. But I also want you to know, as you are praying about what God would have you do, as you're spending time together talking about that, it's really important for me that you know you are not taking this step alone. That when you take this step of faith, you are not stepping out alone, but you are surrounded by a community of people who are also taking that step of faith with you, that are in this journey with you. And so I wanted to go ahead and share some of that with you this morning. Well, as we continue our look in this series, Prepare, where we're looking at this pivotal moment in Israel's history, they're making this transition from worshiping God in a portable location, this tabernacle, to a permanent location, this temple. And throughout this series, we've been looking at what can we learn from this? And we've looked at why do we do the work of preparation? Who does the work of preparation? And this week, we're looking at this question of strengthening the foundation as the first part of this initiative. And the passage that Mary read for us this week actually names the location for the foundation of this temple. And it clues us into why this particular spot was chosen. It's because David himself, King David, had a spiritually defining moment in this exact spot. As we're talking about this morning, this idea of spiritually defining moment, I want to give you a definition for what I have for these kinds of moments, because we're going to talk a lot about them. But when I think of a spiritually defining moment, I think of a moment when we've had an experience or a realization or an idea that radically transforms your idea of God. Radically transforms how you see God or how you see yourself in relation to God. It can be a powerful experience. It could be reflecting on some experience that you've had, that you come to this new realization of how God has already been at work in your life. And these can be wonderful moments. These can be moments that are the culmination of lots of good things coming together, and you just can't believe that they have led to this great place. But they've also can be these moments that come out of reflecting on a painful experience that we've had, a difficult season of life that has forced us to wrestle with God in some ways that have brought us to a new understanding of who God is and our relationship to Him. One such experience for me was back in September of 2007. That was when my father passed away. And during that season, it was just a season of profound disorientation where I was disconnected and out of touch with myself, out of touch with God. I was asking questions and wrestling with things that I had never wrestled with before. And to be quite honest with you, it was a season where I was coping by drinking more. And all of this culminated in a trip to New York City for New Year's that year. It was a trip that I took with a couple of friends of mine, and just to be transparent with you guys, it was a trip where I had consumed a lot of alcohol. And afterwards, I felt miserable. I felt miserable physically, but I felt miserable emotionally and spiritually. And I remember on the drive home from this trip reflecting and having this profound moment of clarity where I said, this is not who I want to be. This is not who I want to be, and I believe that God has better for me than this. And it was a moment where I made some commitments about what I was going to do going forward in life. It was a fork in the road where I chose a different path and made some commitments about who I wanted to be in light of who I believed God was inviting me to be. Now, I don't know that these two things had anything to do with each other, but I did meet Sharon about a month later, so take that for what you will. But this location, Mount Moriah, was chosen as the location for the temple because it was the location of some spiritually defining moments. In this Prepare initiative, as I shared, there are two main components. There's strengthening the foundation and building the future. And this week we want to look at strengthening the foundation. And we want to look at that because I believe Bright City has also been a place where people have had some spiritually defining moments. And so we want to strengthen the foundation of Bright City because we want to make sure that it continues to be a place where significant moments happen in people's faith journeys. And so I want to look at these three events, three things that happened, three spiritually defining moments that happen on Mount Moriah because they tell us three things that we need to know about strengthening our foundation as a church. The first spiritually defining moment that happens on Mount Moriah is a story that maybe you're familiar with. Maybe this is a new story for you, but it's a story that's challenging. It's thought-provoking. It challenges our understanding of God. It challenges our understanding of what it means to trust God. But it's the story of Abraham and his near sacrifice of his son, Isaac. In this story, Abraham, if you're not familiar, is the one that God calls to this new land. And God is going to bless him with a whole nation, that he's going to give him more children than there are stars in the sky. And he's going to bless him with this great nation. But there's one major hiccup in the plan, and that is that Abraham's wife, Sarah, is barren. And so Abraham feels that he needs to come and figure this out, make this work. And so he has some attempts that he makes to make this happen. Maybe God needs his help, and those end up going off the rails in some really difficult ways. And finally, when Abraham is in his old age, Sarah, his wife, becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son named Isaac. And so this is the means by which God is going to give him this great family. However, when Isaac gets to at least the age where he can carry some wood, God comes to him and asks him to do the unthinkable. God asks him to sacrifice his son, Isaac. In this moment, obviously a difficult moment for Abraham. He's seen what it's like to go his own way, to figure things out for himself. And so in this moment of obedience, he follows and he does what God asks him to do. He goes and he takes his son Isaac to a place where God's going to show him to make this sacrifice. And as they come close to the place, Isaac is realizing we have wood, we have fire, but where is the lamb for the sacrifice? And Abraham's response in this moment is, the Lord will provide. And so they make their way up this mountain, they build the altar, they pile up the wood. Abraham binds his son Isaac, places him on the altar, takes his knife, and is about to take his life when the angel of the Lord stops him and says, do not lay a hand on this boy. And Abraham looks up and he sees in the thicket a ram caught there for the sacrifice. Now, for obvious reasons, this is a difficult story. It raises our questions about God and why would God ask him to do this. But one of the things that I want you to know when you think about an experience like this, in particular, a defining moment like this, one of the things that's important to know about someone's religious experience, whether that is someone in Scripture or in our own lives in particular, is that it is nearly impossible to understand someone's religious experience from the outside. You cannot observe it as a spectator and fully understand it. There's something going on inside of it between Abraham and God that can only be understood inside of it. And I think that that's important for us to name and understanding that there are things going on in this story that we can't fully grasp. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard wrote a whole book called Fear and Trembling, where he wrestles with this story and really comes to this conclusion that ultimately, at the end of the day, this is beyond our rational capacity to come to grips with, and that is on purpose because there are things with God that are beyond our rational capacity to come to grips with. And in this story, Abraham has a spiritually defining moment. In this moment where this ram is discovered, he declares out loud, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord provides. He discovers that even in our most desperate moments, he learns that this God is the God who can be trusted in our most desperate moments. And so as we think about strengthening our foundation, the first thing that we have to learn and understand is that the Lord will provide. As you think about what it means to participate in this initiative, I think the challenge that's put to each one of us is, what are our things that we say, God, you can touch anything, but I dare you not to touch that. Do not touch this. You can have everything else, but you cannot touch this. I refuse to trust you with this. What Abraham demonstrated in this story is that there was nothing that he would withhold from God. What is it that we are inclined to withhold from God? And under that, what is it that we're afraid of not being met? What provision do we fear not being met? And so we've got to learn first that the Lord will provide. The second spiritually defining moment that happens on this location comes in 2 Chronicles 3:1. It's the passage for this week. It says, Then Solomon began to build the Lord's temple in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. at the site David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Now, there's a lot going on here. You're like, okay, what are we talking about? A threshing floor, Ornan the Jebusite, preparing a place. What is happening here? What's happening here is David, in this place, has a spiritually defining moment because this is a place where the Lord appeared to David. And it's a defining moment precisely because of a tragic moment of disobedience on David's part. David has this moment, it's a moment of profound ego where David gives an order to have all the people of Israel counted, and in particular to have all of the troops of Israel counted. Kind of in this moment where he's like, I want to know how many troops are at my disposal. Like, what actual power do I have? How many troops do I have? And the count comes back and there's over 1 million troops in Israel. And he has this moment of, look at what I have amassed. A moment to admire his power and to kind of think, who would dare come against me? And in this moment, God sees this as a moment of detestable evil. And it's detestable because in this moment, David is departing from his absolute dependence on God for the care of the people of Israel, for this nation. And so there's going to be consequences for this decision that David has made. And God gives David a choice as to what the consequence is going to be. He says, do you want 3 years of famine, 3 months of bloodshed from an attacking army, or 3 days of the sword of the Lord? In other words, a plague to come upon the land. David is beginning to realize what he has done in making this decision, and in desperation throws himself on the mercy of God and chooses the 3 days of the sword of the Lord. And so a plague comes on the land and 70,000 men are killed by this plague. And it's a powerful story about leadership and how when leaders make foolish decisions, the people they lead suffer because of it. And so David is seeing the devastation that has come because of this decision that he has made. David sees the angel of the Lord standing over the city of Jerusalem with its sword drawn, and he pleads with the angel of the Lord for this devastation to end. The angel is standing on this threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, the precise place where the temple is to be built. The angel instructs David to build an altar to the Lord on this very spot. And so David goes to Ornan, who owns this piece of land, and tells him that he wants to buy this piece of land so that he can make an offering to the Lord here. And Ornan says, you're the king. You can have it. You can take it. You can take my plows to build an altar. You can take the oxen for the sacrifice. And David makes this declaration in this moment, I will not make an offering to the Lord that costs me nothing. And so he pays Ornan every bit that the land is worth, builds the altar, and offers the sacrifice. I tell you all of this, I go into the details of this story to help you understand why this was a spiritually defining moment for David. It was a spiritually defining moment because this experience brings him to the realization of something about himself in relationship to God. And that is that it's not about David and what he can build. It's not about David and the nation and the kingdom that he can establish. There is nothing that David can build for his own glory that God cannot tear down in a matter of days. He's bringing David to the understanding that this life is not about him. I'm wondering this morning, have you come to grips with the fact and the freedom that this life isn't about you? That there's nothing that we can build for our own glory that cannot be destroyed. Have you come to understand that life is most meaningful when it's not about us? One of my favorite depictions of this, not surprisingly, comes from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The story of Dr. Strange. For those that haven't seen it, it's about a doctor named Stephen Strange, who is this sort of cocky neurosurgeon who is at the height of his career. He has lots of fame and notoriety for the things that he has accomplished. But then in the midst of all of this, he has this awful car accident where his hands go through the windshield and destroys his hands. the very things which have given him the ability to perform some of the incredible procedures that he has performed. And so he spends everything he's got on having procedures done to try to fix his hands so that he can have his life back, and none of it works. And so in this moment of desperation, he finds out about this place called Camartage. And so he goes to this place where he meets this person called the Ancient One. And the Ancient One introduces him to this interdimensional power, these forces that are at work all around us, and how they can be used. And one of the ways that they can be used is to heal his hands. As we get towards the end of the movie, the Ancient One has this awful accident. It is the end of her life, and she's having this conversation with Dr. Strange. And she says to him in this moment, "Arrogance and fear still keep you from learning the simplest and most significant lesson of all." And Dr. Strange responds, "What is that?" And she says, "It's not about you." What she's getting at this moment is that Dr. Strange has a choice to make, that he can take this power, he can use it to heal his hands and go back to his glorious life as a surgeon, the glamour of that, or he can choose to use it for the good of the world. The Ancient One says, if you choose to go back to this glamorous life as a surgeon, the world would be all the lesser for it. And so she invites him to this moment of deciding my life is going to be about more than me. As we think about preparing for the future of Bright City and strengthening the foundation, the second thing that we have to learn is that this isn't about us. It's not about us. It's about what God can do through us to impact and to build his kingdom. David's learning in this moment, it's not about him, and we've got to take that on board as well, that it's not about us. In this passage, what the author is saying by telling us this is that this is a place where spiritually significant moments happen. That's why it is built there. It's because this is a place where spiritually defining moments happen. Back in September when we were doing our vision nights, for those that were able to join us, one of the things that we had you do at the beginning of that was just take some time to share about your own spiritually defining moments here at Bright City. Some things that you've experienced here that have been significant for your faith journey. And we did that, first of all, just because we wanted to take time to celebrate together some of the things that God has done and to be reminded of the ways that God has been at work in our community. But we also want to make sure, as we strengthen the foundation, that we're remembering these things so that we remember that we want this to continue to be a place where people are having spiritually defining moments. And I wanted to take some time this morning just to share a few from the 7 years of our church that have stuck out to me, that have been shared with me. I want to share some of these with you because I think that it reminds us of just some of the incredible things that God has been up to in our community as we think about why we strengthen the foundation. One of the early stories of our church was a young man who had been struggling with a sense of purpose in his life. He had been living far from home. He was disconnected from his family, from community. He was beginning to really struggle with a sense of isolation. And in this moment, connected with someone online and went to meet this person. It turned out that they were not who he thought they were. And this whole meeting led to some decisions that intensified his feelings of worthlessness and self-loathing. It was this spiral downward to the point where he was in desperation and considering taking his own life. But in that moment, he had this sudden, spontaneous thought that came to mind about this place called Bright City that he had heard of. And in that moment, he thought, maybe this is my last hope. He started attending Bright City, started getting involved, discovered that this was a place where he could find connection with others, where he could belong. He found that the things that he had been given, gifts that he had, could be used to strengthen this community and to pour into this community. And so he found purpose and fulfillment in this place. And quite literally, it saved his life. Another wonderful story more recently was the story of one of our high school seniors. One of our high school seniors recently had homecoming on a weekend. They had a homecoming dance Saturday night. It was a late night. Sunday morning, they got up, they had to go to work Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, and so it was just a very full weekend. And so when her mom went to pick her up from work, she just assumed that she would want to go home. But she said, no, I want to go to Illuminate. I want to be at Bright City Student Ministry. It had had such a profound effect on her that even in a weekend like this that was exhausting, this is where she wanted to be. To hear a high school senior making that decision is something significant. We've seen some incredible things happen through our prayer ministry, where we've prayed for folks going through medical treatments and medical trials and seeing people experience healing. But that in itself is powerful, but really it's been defining for the people who have prayed for them. Because as they've prayed for them and seen them experience healing, it's been a reminder to them to hold on to faith in those moments and those times where it's hard to trust God. It's given them a confidence to hold on even when it was hard to trust God. There was a young man who started attending Bright City, and we were praying over him regularly. And through this time, we saw God help him break some really unhealthy habits that had formed. We saw God bring fresh faith alive in him, and even saw him take some difficult steps relationally to end some relationships that needed to end and to take some steps that were really scary to take. And yet God, through Bright City, supported him and sustained him through that. We've heard stories of Bright City helping people to trust a church again, or rediscover faith in a less legalistic, more relational way. We've seen children and adults of all ages take the step of baptism. And I'm sure you have other stories of spiritually defining moments that you've had or those in your small group have had. The Prepare Initiative is about funding the ministries that make those spiritually defining moments happen. And as we look to the future, we want to make sure that that foundation is strong. But there's one more defining moment that happened at this place called Mount Moriah. That we have an even deeper foundation than just the spiritually defining moments that we create as a church to stand on. There's something that happened at this location. One of the things that we know about Mount Moriah is that it wasn't just a mountain peak, but it was a mountain ridge. And I've got a map to kind of show you what I mean by this. You can see how this red area circled here, all of this is this mountain ridge, Mount Moriah. And another place that we know on this mount is a place called Golgotha. You can see it up in the top outside of the city walls, the place where Jesus himself was crucified. The place where God didn't just almost give his son, but the place where God gave his only begotten son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. What I'm getting at is that as a church, our ultimate foundation has to be the bedrock of Christ, of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. If we're truly going to strengthen our foundation, our ultimate foundation has to be Jesus. Growing up, there was a hymn that we sang, and it had these words, "On the solid rock of Christ I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand." If our foundation as a church is anything other than the life, death, and resurrection, it will be sinking sand. It can't be just our trust in God. It can't just be spiritually defining moments. It has to be our solid foundation of Jesus. It has to be that for us as a church, but as a church, we are made up of people. And so what that means is that this begins with you and me. This begins with your life and my life. Are our lives standing on this foundation of Jesus? Is our hope in Jesus? Is our security in Jesus? Our provision, our peace, our purpose? Because if it's not, our foundation is sinking sand. And this moment right here could be a spiritually defining moment for you. A moment where you say, my hope was in, but I want it to be in Jesus. My peace was in this, but I want it to be in Jesus. My security, my purpose was in, but now I want it to be in Jesus. I want to give us a moment now just to reflect on that. And we're going to have our prayer team come forward to be available if you would like somebody to pray over you in this moment. But I just want to invite us all to bow our heads and take this moment to reflect on where our foundation is. God, this morning we bring this critical question before you. God, to analyze our hearts and our minds and to identify, when we're really honest with ourselves, where my foundation has been. Where has my peace been? What has my security been based upon? If we're really honest with ourselves, we have felt the sinking sand beneath our feet, but we just thought, if I can just work a little bit harder, I'll get there. It'll be firm. And so we continue to work ourselves, sinking further and further. This morning, we take this step onto your foundation. The cornerstone. The foundation that will never let us slip.